Tonight, tensions at sea and in the air. A Chinese warship's close call with a U.S. destroyer, days after a Chinese fighter jet flew in front of a U.S. Air Force plane. Plus, the race is on.
We have to resist the politics of personality.
The G.O.P field is about to get a lot more crowded. And with summer comes sun. And a warning over the deadliest type of skin cancer and how to prevent the worst outcomes.
Early detection is actually the key.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. More aggression from China. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. A Chinese warship coming within yards of a U.S. naval destroyer. It's the latest act of Chinese aggression in the Taiwan Strait, and it comes after another close call in the air just last week, all raising concerns these types of incidents could reach crisis levels between the two nations. CBN News national security correspondent Caitlin Burke is following the developments and has our top story. Caitlin, what is Washington saying tonight?
Jenna, U.S. officials say this behavior is unacceptable, warning China's government there is no reason for this kind of dangerous and aggressive action.
Do the right things to rein in that kind of conduct, because I think accidents can happen that could cause things to spiral out of control.
When you have pieces of metal that size, whether it's in the air or on the sea, and they're operating that close together, it wouldn't take much for an error in judgment or a mistake to get made, and somebody could get hurt. And that's just got to be unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to them as well.
New video shows the Chinese ship cutting across the path of the U.S. destroyer, coming within 150 yards of it. The captain of a Canadian vessel says the Navy asked the Chinese to stay clear of the ship, then had to slow down to avoid a collision. The U.S. is accusing the Chinese of acting in an unsafe manner and violating maritime rules. Beijing, meanwhile, is standing its ground. The Chinese defense minister defending its warship, telling the U.S. to mind your own business, and calling the U.S. and Canadian military's presence in the Taiwan Strait a provocation. Just last week, a Chinese fighter jet flew within 400 feet of an American plane over the South China Sea. U.S. officials say these moves follow a pattern by China.
They're trying to flex their muscles and advance authoritarianism. We need to stand strong.
Just before the Taiwan Strait incident, Secretary Austin said the U.S. is committed to ensuring every country can fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows, but warned, quote, "We will not flinch in the face of bullying or coercion."
Our shared goals are clear: to deter aggression, and to deepen the rules and norms that promote prosperity and prevent conflict.
Both the U.S. and China attended a defense forum in Singapore over the weekend. China's defense minister declined a one-on-one meeting with Austin, which the secretary called unfortunate. Jenna?
Caitlin, does the U.S. have any plans to try to de-escalate some of this tension with China?
The Biden administration is looking for a diplomatic fix. They've sent a senior State Department official to Beijing. But during today's White House press briefing, John Kirby echoed that the U.S. will continue to stand up for freedom of navigation in accordance with international law. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has also weighed in on the importance of diplomacy, saying a Cold War with China is not inevitable at this point. Jenna?
All right, National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke, thank you. Michael O'Hanlon is a senior fellow and the director of research in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution, and he joins us now. Michael, welcome. So two close calls in less than 2 weeks. Why? Why is China doing this?
China feels there's an asymmetry, and it's partly right, but mostly wrong. What I mean by that is that we constantly monitor what's going on near China with our military, and we've done that for decades, in a way that they don't really have the ability to do near us, partly because they don't have allies near our territory the way that we have allies near theirs. And that's why they're mostly wrong, because they're ignoring two things about why we are there. One is that international law allows us to be there in these waters, just as, in theory, Chinese ships could come pretty close to North America and we really couldn't complain. And secondly, we have allies that actually welcome our presence because they are nervous about China. And therefore, these are other democracies. These are other countries that generally behave pretty well on the international stage, and they want American help. China has a hard time with the notion of alliances. They don't really have good allies, and they regret and resent that we do. So for these reasons, what looks to them like an unfair American advantage, with U.S. ships constantly almost within eyesight, or at least potentially within eyesight of China, sailing in these waters in the Western Pacific, they fail to recognize we're there because international law lets us be there, and because U.S. allies and friends want us there. I'm not trying to say everything's right about U.S. foreign policy, but those core realities are things Beijing fails to fully appreciate. And there's no next step for China except to make this even more dangerous. They're not going to convince us to stop operating out there. So I think they've really got to accept that this is just a reality. They can find other ways to compete with us, but on this one, we are going to keep using our international rights and prerogatives.
But Michael, what if they don't accept it? Do you think the U.S. needs to respond?
Yes. I think, you heard John Kirby a little bit ago saying, what if there were a collision, and what if there were an accidental escalation? If some ship captain out there decides to shoot at the other ship rather than simply try to maneuver away. I think the kind of things you would do would depend on the incident. And you don't want to start World War III over a ship collision, but you don't want the Chinese to feel like they can just get away with this with, public criticism and nothing worse. So at some point, you might have to start denying certain Chinese ships access to certain ports. There, various ways in which you can try to ratchet up sort of a punitive ladder, if you will, that maintains some sense of proportionality, and probably begins with punishments that are largely either symbolic, diplomatic, or economic, rather than lethal military responses. But also you can imagine putting more U.S. ships, a higher fraction of the U.S. Navy, out in the Western Pacific. We've been trying to do that already, but you could imagine saying to China, listen, if you keep doing this, we're going to have to assume malevolent intent and put more reinforcements out there than we already have. So those are the kinds of policy choices you have. None of them are all that great. So I hope that China realizes it doesn't have good options either, and we all want to just ratchet this thing down.
In terms of communication, we know President Biden hasn't spoken to President Xi since the spy balloon incident back in February. Is that a problem?
Yes, and, it is possible that we slightly overreacted on the balloon. I'm just going to put that out there. I don't make any apologies for China. They shouldn't have been operating those balloons. But it really was not some huge national danger either. And it's possible. You can debate whether we should have shot it down. You can certainly debate whether Blinken should have canceled his trip. Maybe the right combination was to shoot down the balloon and still have the trip, although the Chinese might have refuted that. But in any event, I think we have to maintain some degree of proportionality. When we push back against China, we want to do it in a way that makes sense for the specific provocation and not blow up the whole relationship. We just can't afford to do that.
Yeah. All right, Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution. It's always good to see you. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Jenna.
Well, to the 2024 race for the White House, the G.O.P. field is expanding by 3 this week. Former New Jersey Governor Christie will announce his presidential campaign tomorrow in New Hampshire. The one-time ally of former President Trump has more recently become a fierce critic, calling Trump a coward and puppet of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, today, former Vice President Mike Pence filed paperwork to throw his hat into the ring. He's expected to announce Wednesday he'll hold a rally with voters in Des Moines and then take center stage in a CNN town hall that night. This weekend in Iowa, Pence distanced himself from his old boss.
We have to resist the politics of personality and the siren song of populism unmoored to timeless conservative principles.
And North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum is also expected to announce his candidacy Wednesday. And for more on this, let's bring in Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, good to have you with us this evening. So Christie announcing tomorrow, it looks like. Many see him as a match for Trump, being another outspoken firebrand type. What do you make of Christie's bid?
I think he could be a match for Trump on a debate stage. I think that would be must view watching. I don't think he's a match for Trump in this race, meaning even though Governor Christie brings some of the same bravado and and style. He doesn't have the same profile or the same support within the Republican Party. Christie will start, far down the list with a lot of the other contenders for the nomination. But again, that debate, Christie's debate performance against Marco Rubio in New Hampshire, a couple cycles ago, that was a turning point in that 2016 race. And so Christie will be a candidate to watch, although I don't think he's going to be the nominee.
So Mike Pence expected to announce Wednesday. Do you think he can get out from under the shadow of Donald Trump? One opening for him might be the issue of abortion, where he is more staunch in his pro-life views.
Well, Pence, because of his high name ID, he's virtually, known across the. He's a household name, whether primary voters or general election voters. But the path for Pence is tough. As he emerges from the shadow of Trump, he is having to be more of a critic of Trump, and that will alienate part of the electorate. But then there's part of the electorate who does want to move on from Trump, who say, well, you were his vice president for 4 years. You helped him, and so they're not going to support Pence. So I think the former vice president is really caught in the middle, and there aren't a lot of voters in the middle between these two outside pressures.
Yeah, and then, of course, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, he's pretty unknown to most Americans and likely will not be the nominee. What do you think the end game is for someone like him, maybe a cabinet seat?
Sure. I mean, you can run and lose in the right way and position yourself for another job. You can raise your profile to be on cable television or other things. For those who don't know Governor Burgum, it's the feel-good story of starting a software company and selling it to Microsoft for $1.1 billion. So he's trying to have this outsider businessman profile, which there's an appetite for that, but he doesn't have that celebrity status that Trump or some others that are bringing to the table. So he could make a debate stage, and we'll see what happens. But it will take a lot for him to be a top contender.
So Peggy Noonan has an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal. Nathan, she writes that a third Trump nomination would mark the end of the Republican Party. She writes, if the party chooses Trump in 2024, it will mean it has changed its essential nature and meaning. Do you agree with that?
We have declared the end of political parties multiple times in my 20+ years of doing this. So I'm not going to go as far as declaring the end of the Republican Party, but the parties do evolve and shift and change. And what Republicans maybe haven't accounted for is that if Trump gets elected to another term, how he performed, he's not going to be just a policy, we're going to do this on taxes or we're going to do this on abortion. I think he is going to level some very personal vendettas against people. Or opposite, one of the first things he'll do is probably pardon some of the January 6th insurrectionists, which would be an incredibly divisive decision to do. And so it's going to be a wild card. But I think the Republican Party will remain. It just might look differently than what we are used to seeing.
All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, thank you.
Thanks, Jenna.
Well, with the future of the denomination at stake, Southern Baptists gear up for their annual convention. The topics they'll be tackling next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. Character matters in ministry. That's the theme of the Southern Baptist Convention's Pastors Conference beginning Sunday at the SBC annual meeting. It comes as the denomination faces its largest membership drop in a century. According to Lifeway Research, nearly 500,000 members left the SBC in 2022. Reasons include the COVID-19 pandemic and older members dying off. But the SBC has also faced several crises in recent years, including a major sex abuse scandal, controversies over race, and the ongoing debate over women in leadership. Bob Smetana is the author of the book Reorganized Religion and Rights with the Religion News Service, and he joins us now. Bob, welcome. So character matters in ministry is the theme of this year's SBC Pastors Conference. Your thoughts on that, and does the SBC have some work to do in this area?
Well, that's a great question. I think the overwhelming concern for the SBC right now is sort of these other big issues. What do they do with abuse? What do they do with women pastors? The Pastors Conference is it's more of a kind of voluntary meeting. So there'll be obviously they're concerned about character, and the abuse issues have been a big issue, but those overshadow really that conference.
Yeah. So, SBC attendance, as you know, has been a major, saw a major drop in 2022. In light of this conversation, how do you think the church can start to win people back?
That's a great question. So I think one of the things is they could spend some time thinking about the decline. Really what's happened for the SBC and a lot of other denominations is other kinds of issue, politics, disagreements over race, all kinds of things. These disagreements over the role of women have overshadowed. They don't really have time. Like, for example, at the Southern Baptist meeting this year, they're going to be talking about what to do with sexual abuse and how to deal with that. And they put that off for so long dealing with that it's overshadowing everything. The same with this question of women ministry. There's a disagreement over whether women are barred from being just senior pastors or if any woman could have a title of pastor. And until they get those sort of sorted out, they really haven't had any time to talk about this kind of overwhelming decline.
Yeah. You mentioned women in ministry. Earlier this year, the SBC ousted several churches over having women pastoral roles, including Saddleback Church, founded by best-selling author Rick Warren. Some churches like Saddleback are asking for the decision to be overturned. Bob, is this really a defining moment for the SBC in relation to women?
It's a couple of things. So one thing, there's a question for some women in the SBC is, given all the other problems, especially this issue of sexual abuse, why are you worried so much about women in leadership? And then they have actually a significant disagreement over what their statement of faith means. Does it mean that no woman could speak at a service or have a leadership role? Or does it mean just the senior pastor has to be leadership? There's a significant disagreement over and lack of clarity on that.
So what do you think lies ahead for the future of the Southern Baptist Convention? What are the challenges, opportunities? How do you see it?
It's going to be very complicated. I think this whole issue of sexual abuse is going to continue. So last year they passed some significant reforms on how to deal with abuse, including a list of pastors that were abusive. That there's a real disagreement over who should be on that list. Should it just be people who are convicted or have had legal action taken against them or confessed, or should churches be able to investigate whether someone's abusive and put them on that list? There's a big disagreement over that. And whether, misconduct by pastors can be, that's not involving children, but can be considered abusive. So that's one question. And then who's going to pay for all that? Because it's hard to get people to come to your church if they think you're going to be abusive.
Well, once again, his book is Reorganized Religion. Bob Smetana of Religion News Service, thank you so much for coming on this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Well, looking to soak up some sun rays this summer. When we come back, the deadly dangers of too much time in the sun. With the official start of summer just a couple weeks away now, a warning tonight about too much sun exposure. As medical reporter Lori Johnson explains, it can lead to the most dangerous kind of skin cancer.
Melanoma, the deadliest type of skin cancer, usually begins as an abnormal mole. If left untreated, it can grow deep into the skin and travel along the lymphatic system or bloodstream and start tumors in important organs like the brain, lungs, or liver. While rates of melanoma have reached about 100,000 a year, related deaths are down to about 8% or 8,000 a year.
Early detection is actually the key, because if we could find every melanoma early, we could cure every melanoma. And what people need to do is everybody needs to be aware of their moles.
Doctors suggest using the ABCDEs of melanoma to detect a suspicious mole. See a doctor if you find one that's asymmetrical, with an uneven border, is more than one color, a diameter bigger than a pencil eraser, or is evolving. If a biopsy shows a suspicious mole is indeed melanoma, a doctor will likely remove it.
UV exposure and ultraviolet exposure from the sun's rays is really the #1 most preventable and avoidable cause of not only skin cancer, but also signs of aging. So things like fine lines, wrinkles, brown spots, loss of elasticity. And just one blistering sunburn during childhood or adolescence can actually more than double your risk of melanoma later in life.
A broad-spectrum sunscreen with an SPF of 30 or more helps protect against the sun's harmful rays. Check whether the type of sunscreen is mineral or chemical.
The FDA considers the mineral sunscreens to be generally recognized as safe and effective, GRASE. But when it comes to the chemical sunscreens, they're actually calling for sunscreen manufacturers to really take a closer look at the safety of some of those ingredients.
That's because animal studies show the chemicals can be absorbed into the bloodstream, and at least one, oxybenzone, could possibly cause hormone disturbances. Doctors say any type of sunscreen is better than none at all, but these products are not perfect, and neither are we. Research shows most people don't use enough sunscreen or reapply it as often as we should. That's why physical sunblocks are also recommended. Things like shade, clothing, sunglasses, and a wide-brimmed hat. And while spray tans and self-tanning lotions are okay, never use tanning beds, which emit 4 times more ultraviolet radiation than the sun. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thank you, Lori. Boy or girl, still ahead, the National Zoo's gender reveal party for its newest baby gorilla. Finally tonight, it's a girl. The Smithsonian National Zoo in Washington, D.C. has announced its newest resident, a baby gorilla. Born May 27th, the tiny primate was welcomed into the world with a celebration. This morning, zookeepers threw a party for the gorilla troop, complete with cake, confetti, and a gender reveal banner. The zoo said every western lowland gorilla birth is cause for celebration, since the species is considered critically endangered. Keepers are asking for help in naming her, asking whether she looks like a Lola, Macaulay, or a Zara. Today, the vote is now open on the zoo's website. The winning name will be announced Friday. And I went and voted today. I voted for Macaulay. That's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.